Hey, what is up, mortals? It's Miggy Sawdust here with a new video for you. Welcome to part 1 of What If Deku Was Trained by Aizawa. I just wanted to greet you all by just saying, sit back and relax. You're in for a treat. Let's begin. It was a rainy day in Mustafal, lightning thundering from up above. Izuku Midori was running in an alley, his breath heavy. "Get back here, you little runt!" A villain yelled out from behind the boy. "Somebody help me!" Izuku cried out. He was never much of a runner, especially when he got into trouble. But now, the boy found himself faced with the danger of being stabbed and killed. "Nobody's gonna save you now!" The villain yelled out in an angered voice that was muffled by a face mask that covered his face. "Where did it all go wrong?" Izuku thought to himself, as he turned his gaze over his shoulder to see the villain still running after him, a knife gripped tightly in both of his hands. A few minutes earlier, Izuku Midoriya was walking home from school. Inko Midoriya, his mother, had asked him to buy some groceries on his way home, and that was what the boy intended on doing. The streets of Mustafal were filled to the brim with a blockage and a backlog of pedestrians, meaning that either there was a big accident or there was a villain attack. Maybe I could take a shortcut? Izuku thought to himself as he slowly passed by an alleyway. As much as the boy would love to see what was going on and write down what had happened in his notes, he needed to make it to the grocery store before it began to rain. Looking up to the sky, the boy took in the sight of dark clouds that looked ready to burst at any second. Taking a quick moment to think, the boy ultimately decided that it was better to take the shortcut. It's now or never. Deku turned his body and entered the alleyway. It was dark and creepy, with an eerie feeling. It had the usual dumpsters with a few trash bags lying here and there. Izuku found this alleyway to be a bit out of sorts, picking up on that eerie feeling, but he decided to ignore it and continued on his way along the alleyway. "No! Please! The sound of a stranger's horrid scream caught Izuku's attention once he had made it far into the alleyway. Now, if you had just given me your money, I would have let you get away. But you decided to be stupid!" The hoarse and dry voice scared Izuku. It was something he had never heard before, and his instincts told him to run, but his feet wouldn't move. The screams of horror had originated from inside a dumpster right behind Izuku, which struck him with fear. Fresh air! A blood-tattered villain covered in black clothing, stained with the stench of the dumpster, shoved the lid out of his way and sprang right out of it, landing in the alleyway right behind Izuku. "Eep!" Izuku yelped, his head slowly turning so that he could see the villain behind him. "Well, what do we have here?" the villain asked rhetorically. I... The boy stuttered, struggling to find words to use. "Sorry? What was that?" the villain mocked, taking a step towards Izuku. He had originally sheathed a knife in a leather pouch hidden under his jacket, but now he had to take it out again. Izuku wanted to say something in response, but he couldn't, and with his life on the line, his legs gained strength. "I can't die here," Izuku thought, taking off in the direction of a corner at the end of the alleyway, which was in the opposite direction of all the civilians that this psycho could potentially kill. "Running won't help you, kid!" Izuku turned his head to see behind him once he had reached the corner, his eyes widening. "I've got you!" The villain raised his voice in excitement, but Izuku thought quickly. Continuing his run, he grabbed onto a trash bag in passing and threw it at the villain just in time to avoid being stabbed. "Well, this kid's got guts," the villain thought, having come to a complete halt, gritting his teeth as he pulled the knife right out of the trash bag and threw it aside. The villain then continued his pursuit of Izuku, who had now made a somewhat large gap between them. "Think, Izuku, think!" the green-haired boy thought to himself as droplets of water began to fall from the sky above. He was thinking frantically and desperately. His life was in more danger than it had ever been, and the only thing he could think about was to run. "No matter where you go, kid, I'll find you!" The villain screamed from behind. It was now closing the gap in between he and Izuku. The boy turned his head to face the villain again, his eyes widening even more. "I need help! I need help! I need help!" Izuku's thoughts grew more frantic as he took a turn into another alleyway where the rain grew more potent. You can't run forever, boy! The villain taunted Izuku again, as he was enjoying this little exercise he was getting. I need help, I need help, I need help! The words continued to rush in Izuku's mind, from side to side, spinning in circles. The boy hated to admit it, but the villain was right. He was running out of breath. Get back here, you little runt! The villain yelled out. He was beginning to get impatient, which, luckily for Izuku, was due to the lack of the villain's own stamina, which had caused his breath to steepen as well. Somebody help me! The boy cried out, taking yet another turn around a corner. This alleyway was also filled with trash bags and trash cans, and a few dumpsters as well. Nobody's gonna save you now! The villain yelled, as Izuku took another turn about halfway down the alleyway, and unfortunately for the emerald green-eyed boy, it was a dead end. No. Izuku spoke in a whisper, once he had reached the end of the alleyway. His face had gone pale, and he remained panting for air, slightly hunched over against the wall. I told you, kid. No one's gonna save you, the villain said with a smile under his mask. Izuku tried to talk again, but no words managed to leave his mouth. I was planning on making your death painless, but since you ran, I think I'll just kill you slowly. The blood-stained villain yelled at Izuku as he ran to Izuku, ready to stab him right in the gut. Ah! Izuku screamed out, shielding his head and chest with his arms, closing his eyes. This video is sponsored by Honey. Honey is a free browser add-on available on Google, Opera, Firefox, Safari. If it's a browser, it has Honey. Honey automatically saves you money when you check out on sites like Amazon, Papa John's, and Kohl's. Wherever you shop, it's a good chance that Honey can save you money. All you have to do when you're checking out at these big sites is click that little orange button, and it will scan the entire internet and find discount codes for you. If there's a coupon code, it will find it. And if there's not a coupon code, you can rest assured that you are getting the best price possible. If you install Honey right now, you can save so much money on your online shopping just doing nothing. It only takes 2 clicks. 10 million people use it, 100,000 5-star reviews. Honestly, unless you hate money, you should install Honey. Use the link in the description below to start saving money right now. The villain's roar was cut short, followed by the sound of material wrapping around something, and the sound of someone getting kicked really hard. It's too early for this. A tired voice caught Izuku's attention, and slowly he opened his eyes. To his surprise and immediate delight, the Eraser hero, Eraserhead, was standing in front of him. The material of his scarf, wrapped tightly around the entirety of the villain, who had tried to kill him just moments ago, lay on the floor. Are you alright, kid? Eraserhead spoke in a tired yet firm tone. His black outfit had been soaked in the rain, while his long, wet black hair covered part of his yellow goggles. Thank you! Izuku sputtered out while bowing his head. Oh my god, it's Eraserhead! Izuku thought to himself, the feeling of danger immediately seeping out of his mind. No problem, kid. Now are you hurt anywhere? Eraserhead said, his voice now slightly filled with annoyance due to his question not being answered. No, Izuku said in a slightly raised voice. Slowly he raised his head a bit and gazed at his idol. Growing up, unlike the other kids in his class, and specifically unlike Bakugo, Izuku had taken a liking to the small-time hero, Eraserhead. The way that the hero handled his situations without the need of a flashy or powerful quirk always amazed Izuku, especially his use of martial arts and the material scarf that he always carried around. Almost immediately going into fanboy mode, Izuku pulled his bag off his back despite the pouring rain and reached into it, taking out his notebook. Could you sign this, Mr. Eraserhead, sir? Izuku said, attempting not to stutter. Meanwhile, Eraserhead just blinked under his goggles. This kid, Eraserhead thought to himself before opening his mouth. You are aware that you almost died, right? Eraserhead asked in a blunt tone that remained tired. Yes, I am, but... The boy's voice was cut off by a sigh from Eraserhead. And you're fine with that? Eraserhead asked again, not giving the boy a chance to continue on about getting his now completely soaked book signed. Well, heroes face life or death situations every day. And I want to be a hero. And to do that, I need to be ready to face death. Izuku spoke the words without a hint of any second thoughts, which impressed Eraserhead a small bit. Is that so? Eraserhead started, looking Deku up and down to get an idea of whether or not this kid was hero material, and continued. And why do you want to be a hero? The villain remained at the back of Eraserhead's mind, but the topic of conversation intrigued him. I want to be a hero that saves everyone to defeat the villain. But I can't do that since I'm quirkless. The boy's voice went from passionate to disappointed in an instant. Is that so? Well, you've got a good heart, kid. Eraserhead stood up, picking up the villain and resting him over his shoulder. The villain seemed to be threatening the hero, but his muffled voice couldn't make it through the material of Eraserhead's scarf. Yeah, I haven't forgotten about you, Eraserhead said in a tired tone, turning his gaze at the villain before returning it to Izuku, who was now behind him. I'd say you've got what it takes to be a hero, kid. But you don't have a quirk, so I'm afraid that's not happening, Aizawa said in a cold tone. Izuku was expecting to hear the words come from his idol's mouth, yet they still brought tears to his eyes. The memories of how he wanted an amazing quirk like All Might's flashed in his mind, how the doctor had told him he wouldn't get a quirk, and how his mother just cried and yelped out apologies when he had asked her if he could still become a hero, how Bakugo and his lackeys had bullied him, and just a few moments ago, when he was defenseless. The boy started as tears began to form in his eyes. Eraserhead just continued to walk, ignoring the boy. How did you manage to become a hero despite only having an eye-related quirk? It was a pain to do so, but Izuku forced the words out of his mouth in one single sentence, causing Eraserhead to pause in his tracks. Having an eye-related quirk that didn't even affect how fast he could perceive or anything of the sort, he faced similar issues to a quirkless person, but he forced his way through it all. He had gotten into UA, despite what everyone else was saying. He had graduated from UA, despite what everyone else told him. And he had become a good hero, despite the hate he had received. So the words reached him. They reached into his soul, and he reached deep into it, to memories. So the words reached him. They reached right into his soul, deeply into it, to the memories of an old friend giving him a reason to keep going, despite his weakness. I trained, kid. I trained really hard, Aizawa said, not yet continuing to walk. Then please teach me! The words reached Aizawa again, but he wasn't surprised at all. He was half expecting the kid to ask for training of some kind. Yet despite that, for the first time in that conversation, Eraserhead hesitated. How old are you, kid? A small spring of hope formed in the depths of Izuku's stomach. 12, sir. The chance of it was small, but if Eraserhead was contemplating his question, then there was a chance he could have his dream realized. 12, huh? He managed to run away from this thug. Eraserhead didn't know why, but he was contemplating whether or not he should train this child. He was 12 and thus had 2 years to learn what he had learnt during his time at UA, which meant that if this kid had the ability to learn what he could do, then this kid stood a chance at actually becoming a hero. Today's a Friday, right? Aizawa asked, causing Izuku's hope to sprout. Yes, Eraserhead, sir, Izuku replied, and Eraserhead heaved a sigh. Tomorrow. The forest at 6 a.m. on the dot. Don't be late. Eraserhead was willing to give the boy a shot. Oh, by the way, what is your name, kid? Your first name. The last thing Eraserhead wanted was a convict running around with the full name of a child that was the root cause of his being arrested, so he corrected himself quickly. It's Izuku, Mr. Eraserhead. Eraserhead nodded and began to walk away. Nice name, kid. From now on, call me Sensei Aizawa. Izuku's face lit up, a smile forming there. Thank you, Sensei Aizawa. Tears of joy began to flow down Izuku's cheeks in typical Midoriya fashion, as the rain began to settle down. Izuku thought about the forest where he and Bakugo had played when they were kids, and packed away his now soaked book. Aizawa didn't show it, but he was looking forward to seeing what this Izuku kid had in store for him. He was hoping for the best, but he was also expecting the worst. If the kid couldn't do what he had the beginnings of a plan for him, then his chances of becoming a hero would dissipate in an instant. But if he could pull through, then Aizawa would have a protege, and by the look on the boy's face, Aizawa could tell that he was prepared for either option. Once Aizawa was out of sight, Izuku ran home and told his mother about the events of that afternoon, completely forgetting to buy the groceries she had asked him to buy. The day was young, and dusk had just barely broken out. Aizawa stood in front of the forest that Izuku and Bakugo had played in as kids. Over the years, it had been polluted slowly but surely, its once beautiful view now tarnished with the leftovers of man. Holding out his wrist, the man pulled his sleeve up his arm and looked at his watch. He has 5 minutes left. The man lowered his arm and looked out to the streets of Mustafu. Not too far away, Izuku was running towards the forest. Aizawa had failed to mention exactly where Izuku was to meet him, but the sight of his teacher standing just outside of the forest relieved the boy. Sensei Aizawa! The green-haired boy came to a halt near Aizawa, leaning forward to catch his breath. You're 5 minutes early. Why were you running? Aizawa asked in a curious tone. I didn't want to be late. The boy continued to catch his breath. Is that so? Aizawa asked, raising an eyebrow. You've got your priorities straight, kid, but try to save your energy for the training. Aizawa spoke in a firm tone, and Izuku nodded. Yes, Sensei Aizawa. In contrast to the previous day, he didn't look so tired. In fact, the man looked like he was taking his midday break, even though it was morning. If you don't mind me asking, what are we doing here, Sensei Aizawa? Izuku asked, now standing up straight. You'll see. Follow me. Aizawa turned to face the forest before promptly walking towards it. Izuku quickly followed behind him. A few moments later, Aizawa and Izuku were standing in the middle of the forest, surrounded by a mixture of trees and rubbish that consisted of small plastics, broken cutlery, broken ornaments, broken appliances, and even broken vehicles. The sight of it all broke Izuku's heart. Over the course of the next 2 years, the hero paused, thinking hard for a second while Izuku looked at him. What was your full name again? Aizawa asked in a sheepish tone, to which Izuku responded with a smile. Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya. Aizawa nodded and continued to talk. You, Midoriya, will be cleaning this forest as a form of physical training on weekends. Aizawa turned to face the boy, waving his right hand in the air, motioning to their surrounding area. The idea confused Izuku. Why do you want me to clean the forest? Izuku asked. And Aizawa smiled like he had been hoping that Izuku would ask that question. You see, Midoriya, I want to train you to use your own piece of the material I use as a scarf. Aizawa paused, reaching up to his neck and tugging at the fabric that was lightly surrounding it. This forest, although dirty, is the safest place outside of UA that I can take you to train. The hero's voice took on a monotone character, and his smile faded. Cleaning this place will not only make the forest usable, but it'll increase your endurance in the process. Izuku's eyes widened. I see. So you want me to clean the forest so I can get stronger and use the trees? The boy raised his hand and pinched his chin in between his index finger and thumb. And shortly after repeating what Aizawa had said, which annoyed the hero, he began to mumble. Which means you're also going to teach me how to use the maneuver around with the scarf. Izuku, being a longtime fan of Aizawa, who to the boy's dismay did a very good job at staying unnoticed and out of the public eye, was well aware that he had used his scarf to move about and gain a huge advantage in combat. Ahem. Aizawa cleared his throat, bringing Izuku out of his mumbling fit. Correct. I will be teaching you how to maneuver with the scarf, however. Aizawa paused. Reaching down to the ground, he picked up a tin can. You will sort all the cans into different piles, based on size and weight. I'll provide bags for storage, once all the cans in an area have been sorted out, and then you'll move on to the bigger stuff. Aizawa paused again while reaching into his pocket and pulling out a black rubbish bag. You'll start now, Aizawa dropped the bag on the floor and put the can down on it as a weight. After that, he pulled out a roll of trash bags out of the same pocket. Yes, Sensei Aizawa! Izuku immediately turned around and began to pick up all the cans, one by one, while Aizawa pulled on the material around his neck, flinging part of it around the branch of a tree just above him, and pulled himself up. Over the course of the next few weekends, and even the odd afternoon after school, Izuku would meet Aizawa at the forest and clean away at the rubbish. The boy didn't understand why his teacher wanted him to make sure everything went together, but he didn't question his teacher, eventually moving on to some of the bigger and heavier stuff. Aizawa made sure to keep a close eye, and in the midst of it all, he was preparing a new sleeping schedule, diet, and workout for the young boy. Simply lifting things up and moving them out of the forest wouldn't suffice. So a little bit over a month since Izuku had started, he began the schedule. Izuku was to ensure that he got enough food in his system, and his sleeping schedule would consist of 6 hours total, sleeping from 10 o'clock at night to 4 o'clock in the morning, which Aizawa had been doing for a little over a decade. On his afternoons, when he wasn't cleaning rubbish, Izuku would be going on jogs, according to his mother. In reality, he was sprinting most of the way, and on other afternoons, Aizawa was teaching him martial arts. On his days off, Izuku was tasked with playing problem-solving games of any sort, whether it be a board game or a video game. Aizawa wanted Izuku to increase his hand-eye coordination. With all that having been integrated over the course of 2 months for his young 12-year-old body, a year came to pass and Izuku had cleaned a good chunk off of the forest. The door to Izuku's third-year class at Aldera Junior High opened up, and his teacher entered the class. The students had been talking and continued to talk regardless of the teacher that had just entered. Quiet down now, kids, the teacher spoke in a somewhat firm yet lazy tone. The students slowly quieted down in response. Now, as you might know, this is your third and final year here at Aldera Junior High. The teacher paused, waving a handful of worksheets in the air. The students all nodded and the teacher continued. I'd hand these all out. The teacher paused again, turning around and throwing the papers into the air. But I know you all want to become heroes. The teacher exclaimed the words and the students all let out their own shouts of approval, each one showing various quirks except for Bakugo Katsuki, who sat with his legs on the table, and Izuku, who lay asleep on his arms, ignorant of what the teacher was saying. Now, your quirks are flashy, but settle down, kids. You know the school rules. The teacher pushed his glasses further up his nose, turning to face the class again and looking through the papers, a thud causing him to look up. Don't let me in with these extras, Teach. Bakugo had jumped onto his desk and was now pointing at himself. I'm going to UA, and I'm going to be the best hero and surpass All Might. The other students all let out grunts of annoyance and otherwise pulled faces at Bakugo. That's not nice, Bakugo. We all stand a chance of getting into a hero course, one student responded, not daring to say UA due to the glaring truth that Bakugo's quirk and overall performance was far greater than anyone there. Keep dreaming! With a lousy finger-extending quirk like that, what are you gonna do? Bakugo taunted, causing the student to cower back into his seat. Noticeably, the teacher didn't do anything about this. I see one other student applied for UA, the teacher continued, as if nothing had happened, and Bakugo wasn't standing on his table anymore. Izuku Midoriya. The class went silent. So silent that the sound of a pencil dropping could frighten someone. Slowly, the class all turned their heads to face Izuku, who was still sleeping on his arms. Oi! You damn nerd! Bakugo roared, jumping over the table of the student next to him and marching to Izuku's table. What? The roar woke the green-haired boy up. Raising his head, Izuku removed his arms from the desk just in time for Bakugo to slam his hand onto it with an explosion. I heard you applied for UA! The blonde was fuming, and the whole class looked ready to laugh. Yeah? So what if I am? Izuku responded, which caught the whole class by surprise. It was just 2 years ago that Izuku would cower and mutter every time Bakugo would even look at him. And now, despite looking heavily sleep-deprived, the emerald green-eyed boy was staring his childhood friend and bully dead in the eyes, which the class and even Bakugo were yet to even get used to.
There's no way a quirkless extra like you will make it to UA!
Bakugo exclaimed, raising his hands into the air with small explosions detonating in his palms. None of the class dared to even chime in. Izuku was a boy that, despite being quirkless, outperformed them in so many ways they didn't dare make fun of him anymore. The boy could defend himself. He was strong, fast, and smart. Even Bakugo was aware of this. Now, Mr. Katsuki, please refrain from using your quirk. The teacher's words went unheard by the explosive blonde and the tired brunette. They both just stared at each other in what some of their classmates depicted as a staring contest. Shortly after, Bakugo relented and returned to his seat in a huff, while Izuku went back to sleeping on his now charred desk. The bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. The students all hurriedly left the class while Izuku slowly packed his stuff away, eyeing Bakugo, who was approaching his desk with his goons. "What is it now, Kachan?" Izuku asked, standing up and slinging his bag over his shoulder. Bakugo, in response to this, slammed his hand on Izuku's desk a second time.
"I'll be damned if you make it into UA, you damn nerd!"
Izuku, in response to this, just furrowed his eyebrows. "I'll make it into UA, Kachan." Izuku responded in a tired yet confident tone, the glow of someone who was determined forming in his eyes.
"Why this little?"
Bakugo became enraged, walking around Izuku's desk at an accelerated pace. Bakugo held out his hand to grab Izuku's collar. In response to this, Izuku backed away to the window of the classroom. "See you tomorrow, Kachan." Izuku forced a smile and climbed through the window, intentionally letting himself fall a bit before grabbing onto the wall and climbing down.
"Get back here, Deku!"
Bakugo roared as Izuku reached the base of the wall and began to walk off.
"I'll get him later."
Bakugo heaved a sigh and waved a hand in the air, signaling to his goons to follow him as he began to walk outside the classroom. Izuku walked into the forest that he had spent the last year cleaning and training in. Aizawa had asked him to arrive earlier that day, and to wear stretchy clothes that he knew that he wouldn't wear outside of training in the forest. A pair of clothes specifically for his training, if you will. Which of course he had done. His body was clad in tight black clothing. They were old clothes, and anyone would guess as much from one look. Heck, even his shoes looked like they had seen much better days. "Good. You wore old clothes." Aizawa's voice originated from just above Izuku, surprising the boy and causing him to get into a defensive stance with his arms above his head. His posture and reaction time showing the fruits of his training over the past year. "Here, catch this." Not even giving Izuku the chance to respond, Aizawa dropped the material scarf he held in his hands, which floated down and landed on Izuku's forearms, somehow staying rolled up and neat. "Is this?" Izuku's eyes lit up and he actually didn't sound tired for a second. "Yes, it's your own capture gear," Aizawa responded, a faint smile forming on his face when he noticed just how happy his student looked. When do I start?" Izuku was fuming with excitement, quickly tucking the equipment over his head so that it would rest on his shoulders. "Immediately." Aizawa spoke firmly before promptly jumping down from the tree. "You have 10 months before the UA entrance exams. This capture gear will be of no use to you during that exam, so be sure to improve on your physical prowess on the side." Izuku nodded and Aizawa began to show him how to use the capture gear. Sometime later that afternoon, after multiple occasions of Izuku getting tangled and stuck in the capture gear, with Aizawa facepalming, the day came to a close, and after watching the news and finding out that All Might had defeated some sludge villain, the next 10 months of Izuku's life consisted of grueling training. Izuku spent his mornings and sometimes late afternoons training his body while learning how to use the capture equipment. And in the early to mid-afternoons, he would study, while at night he would do his usual scrolling through social media for hero clips and spend time being a kid. During this time, Izuku polished his body, and even though he was already one of the most physically capable of his classmates, he still managed to improve. About 2 months into this period, Inko decided that she wanted to lose weight and joined Izuku in his physical activities. At the end of the 9th month, Izuku finished clearing the forest, and it was restored to its natural beauty. The rubbish had mostly been recycled or moved to a nearby rubbish dump. He spent the last month finishing up whatever little training he had left, and spent the last week before the exam resting his body. Finally, the afternoon before the entrance exam came. Izuku met with Aizawa at the entrance of the forest where they started their training 2 years ago. "Good, you arrived," Aizawa started, staring at the forest that he had watched Izuku clean for the past 2 years, while the boy walked up from behind. He spoke in his usual tired tone. "Have I ever been late?" Izuku replied, in just a tired voice. But unlike his teacher, Izuku let out a chuckle. "No, you have not." The hero raised a hand and placed it on his student's shoulder. He was proud of him. "Are you ready for tomorrow, Midoriya?" Aizawa already knew the answer, but he wanted to know if his student knew the same. "I don't think I could be more ready for tomorrow." Izuku gained a determined look on his face, while straightening his posture, his voice reflecting his confidence. "Don't get cocky, kid. There's only so much you can do without a quirk." Aizawa spoke bluntly, but eternally he was cheering his student on. "I know." Izuku's expression wavered for a moment, but his emotions held strong. "Well, kid, I think it's best that you go ahead and get home so you can do whatever little studying you have left to do." Izuku nodded and turned to face his idol and teacher. "Thank you, Sensei Aizawa." Izuku bowed before walking away and waving goodbye to his teacher. The next day, Izuku arrived at UA, and he felt ready for anything. Walking onto the grounds, the boy took in the sight of the entrance to UA, and found that he couldn't help but let his jaw drop. "This is it? This is where my life will be decided?" The boy became confused when he found his face plummeting towards the ground. In his deep thought, he had failed to notice the uneven placement of the cement blocks in the ground, and thus tripped over one. "Oh, crap!" The boy quickly moved his left foot around and in front of his other foot, stopping his fall. "Oop!" The sound of a startled, feminine voice scared Izuku. The boy quickly looked behind him and found a brunette with an unusually round face staring at him with her hand outstretched. "Ha ha ha! You managed to save yourself!" The girl reached up and scratched the back of her head awkwardly. Yeah, Izuku replied, fixing his posture. "Well, good luck with the exam," the girl said, placing her fingertips against each other. "You too." The girl walked off, and Izuku found himself standing on his own in silence.
"Oi, shitty Deku! Get out of my way!"
Izuku flinched due to the sudden loud noise from behind him and quickly shifted to the side. Raising his arms in a defensive position, Izuku looked behind him to see none other than Bakugo Katsuki standing there, palm outstretched and ready to blast Izuku into the next dimension. Kachan, it's you!" Izuku forced a smile which pissed off the explosive teen.
"I don't know why you're wasting everyone's time, Deku. You should just apply for law school or become a fitness trainer,"
Bakugo remarked, acknowledging both Izuku's physical capabilities and his intelligence. Yeah, see you at school on Monday, Kachan," Izuku said in an annoyed tone while walking off, which angered his childhood bully even more.
"Damn that quirkless brat,"
Bakugo thought to himself as he stomped into the building after Izuku. The written exam went as Izuku expected. Well, besides the fact that a blue-haired student with glasses called him out for muttering in front of the whole hall of students. The boy finished half an hour early and took the time to sleep on his arms, which the students around him found annoying. When the practical exam came about, Izuku along with about 24 examinees stood outside a massive entrance to a test city, something Izuku found peculiar. The greenette saw the same brunette as before in his peripheral view, and almost went to go talk to her, but ultimately decided against it, and took the time to stretch.
What are you all standing around there for? Villains wait for no one!
Present Mike announced, and the door suddenly opened. The whole group of people, including Izuku, quickly began to run, with Izuku managing to gain a slight distance in between he and the rest of the examinees. Much like his sensei did in his day-to-day heroism, Izuku chose to go into the back streets of the city. Brief memories of his encounter with that villain all that time ago flashing in his mind. They didn't scare the boy, no. They motivated him. Maintaining a solid pace, the boy went through the streets and attacked the robots. Luckily for him, these robots had buttons at the back of their necks that allowed students with not-so-destructive quirks to get past the entrance exam. He was able to destroy 1-pointers with some struggle, but the 2- and 3-pointers all surpassed him in terms of power and durability. Needless to say, Izuku racked up quite a few points in the back alleys and streets, on the odd occasion going out into the main streets to help an examinee who was cornered or otherwise struggling to defeat a robot. About halfway through, Izuku came across a blonde examinee with a lightning bolt in his hair. He was surrounded by robots which consisted of 4 2-pointers and 1 3-pointer, and he had his hands in the air in front of his torso with his thumbs up. He looked to have an IQ of at least 15, which Izuku found weird but just ignored.
Stand still!
Izuku called out, as he ran towards a student.
Hey!
The student said in a half-beat voice, while Izuku ran up behind the 3-pointer and jumped onto its shoulders.
Hey! Up here!
Izuku called out to the robots, catching their attention as he reached down and hit the button on the neck of the robot. Soon after, the 2-pointers began to shoot their rubber bullets at him, which he evaded by jumping into the air, planting his feet onto the wall, and jumping over both the 2-pointers to the right of the blonde.
Duck!
Izuku yelled out, jumping down into his hands and swinging his legs. Izuku literally swept the boy off his feet, which caused the boy to yelp as his backside collided with the ground.
Yeah,
was all the boy said, as rubber bullets narrowly missed his head and collided with the 2-pointers that now began to fire bullets at Izuku, who quickly jumped into the air again, narrowly avoiding the bullets as well.
Just a bit more,
the greenette thought to himself, taking a rubber bullet to his right leg as he landed on the 2-pointer and pressed the button on its neck. Izuku then went on to do the same thing with the other 3 2-pointers, jumping above them, getting hit by a bullet, and then hitting their button. Izuku huffed and puffed, taking in deep gulps of air to catch his breath.
Are you all right?
Izuku asked, to which the boy nodded in response.
Good luck, then.
Izuku had racked up quite a few points, to the point that he couldn't even remember how many he had. But he didn't want to sit around and do nothing, and risk his chances of getting into UA. So he fixed his posture and went off, running for the main streets since he could no longer find any active robots in the back alleys. Once the boy made it to the main streets, the sight of people running in a specific direction confused the boy. But a sudden rumbling clued the boy in on what was happening.
1 minute left!
Present Mike didn't worry Izuku too much. What did worry him was the source of the rumbling. Far away from Izuku, but closing in on him, was the 0-pointer. A massive robot that was able to look down on the buildings surrounding him. Worry. No. Fear filled the boy's face as he walked into the street. This thing was massive compared to him, and he instantly understood why it was worth 0 points. It was a robot that no one besides the likes of All Might, maybe a handful of other heroes, could defeat with ease. Turning around, Izuku got ready to run for his life. But something caught his attention.
Someone help!
Izuku turned his head over his shoulder and his eyes widened. The girl he had spoken to just before he entered UA's main building was stuck with her leg caught under some rubble, and the 0-pointer was closing in on her. Turning around and dashing towards the girl before his mind could even register what was happening, Izuku made his way towards the girl as fast as he could. There was no way for him to stop the 0-pointer. But the least he could do was pull the girl right out of the way of the robot, if the examiners didn't stop the giant robot in time.
Can you walk?
Izuku asked in a panic as he arrived at the girl's side. Quickly lifting up the rubble that the girl's leg was stuck under, he allowed for her to quickly move her leg out of the way.
No, I can't.
Izuku nodded and quickly picked her up bridal style, which made her blush. It was the first thing he could think of doing, and made a break for it.
The entrance exam has come to a close.
Thank you all for sticking around, and I genuinely hope you enjoyed that. Before you leave, we would just like to let you know that we the Celestials have many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right below here in the description, so feel free to check out all the other incredible projects our team creates. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today's video, so goodbye and have a divine day. Shortly after President Mike announced the conclusion of the entrance exam, the giant zero-pointer slowed down to a halt, and Izuku had just barely moved the brunette to safety before the robot could reach her.
Are you all right?
Izuku asked the brunette, who was blushing furiously. The sight of her already pink-tinted cheeks having gone completely red confused the boy. I'm all right, but could you please put me down? The girl stuttered, and Izuku quickly realized what he had done.
Sorry!
Izuku apologized, gently lowering her down to the ground, before letting his newfound embarrassment get to him. A few moments later, the youthful heroine, otherwise known as Recovery Girl, arrived at the scene. Despite her title, she was a small lady on the older side of the spectrum. The youthful heroine made her way through the streets of the test city, healing any and every injured student until she finally got to Izuku and the brunette. "Would you stay still, darling?" Recovery Girl asked the brunette, who remained still.
Oh my god, it's
Recovery Girl! Izuku thought to himself, as the hero's lips somehow extended down to the brunette's leg and kissed it. Moments later, the girl was moving her foot in a circular motion with a smile on her face. "Thank you, ma'am," the girl spoke in an enthusiastic tone, while the old lady just smiled, examining Izuku for any injuries. Later that afternoon, Izuku arrived at home and informed his mother of the events of the entrance exam before calling Aizawa, who failed to pick up his phone. "That's odd," Izuku spoke softly under his breath while staring at his phone. The boy knew that the teachers of UA would be busy for a long time with marking all of their written exams, so he didn't find it too surprising. Maybe he'll call me later, Izuku thought to himself, before continuing with his usual afternoon schedule. Izuku went on to spend the next week finishing his school year at Aldera Junior High, and the weeks after that he continued his training. Doubts about his score in the entrance exam tugging at his thoughts more and more with every passing day. The boy knew he had done well in both the written and practical, but he had good reasons for doubting his acceptance into UA, and that was all due to the fact that he was quirkless. It was because of this glaring fact that the Greenette had also attended an entrance exam for a law school as his childhood bully had recommended. Once the short break in between school years was nearing its close, a letter with the UA stamp on it arrived to the Midoriya household. Inko, who had lost a considerable amount of weight over the last year, was the first one out of the two Midoriyas to see the letter and came running into Izuku's room.
Izuku...
Struggling to get the words out of her mouth, Inko held the envelope out in front of her, and Izuku instantly understood why she was stuttering.
Is that?
Izuku fumbled on his own words, and Inko nodded. Are you going to open it? Inko asked, and Izuku hesitated, but he reached out to her and took the letter, his heart racing faster than a cheetah could run.
Yeah,
Izuku responded, gulping while looking down at the letter that was now in his hand. He was extremely hesitant to open it in front of his mother, as she quickly picked up on it. I'll give you some time to open it, sweetie. Inko forced a smile while rubbing her hands together slowly. Thanks, Mom. Izuku spoke softly, while his mother turned around and exited the room. closing the door behind her. About an hour later, Izuku was sitting by his desk with the envelope still not opened in front of him. Izuku had wanted to take a moment to calm himself, and it had taken longer than expected. His hands were trembling, and the confidence he had built up over the past 2 years was facing a huge wall that needed to be climbed. Taking a deep breath, Izuku closed his eyes. "It's now or never," Izuku thought to himself, before reaching down and grabbing the envelope, ripping it in half in one swift movement. Flinching, Izuku was surprised when a circular device fell out from inside the envelope and landed on his desk with a thud. Staring down at it, Izuku reached down to it and pushed the top of it lightly, and soon after, a blue screen popped up in front of him. Midoriya. Izuku's eyes lit up as his idol appeared on the screen, looking more tired than usual. "Unlike other teachers at UA, I won't waste your time with giving you all the details on how a student passed or failed. Instead, I just have a few words for you." Aizawa was standing behind a desk in a room that looked very similar to something that would appear on the news. "To be blunt, I'm proud of you, kid. You did well in the entrance exam." The words caused Izuku's heart to beat even faster, and his blood to rush through his veins at an accelerated pace. Despite being quirkless, you, Izuku Midoriya, through heroic actions and making good use of what was provided to you, scored a grand total of 100 points in the practical exam, with 30 villain points and 70 rescue points. A window popped up, showing the top 10 examinees for the practical exam, with Izuku at the top of the list. "Congratulations, Midoriya. You've made it into UA." Aizawa made a smile wider than Izuku had ever seen him pull off in the 2 years of them knowing each other. But it was a smile the boy was almost glad he had never seen before. Regardless, with those last few words, a river of tears left Izuku's eyes, and the video ended. Shortly after, Izuku informed his mother of his success in the entrance exam, which ended up leaving their apartment soaked from a flash flood of tears. Days later, Izuku arrived at the entrance of UA, this time wearing the signature UA uniform with a smile on his yet-to-be-tired face. Entering the building, Izuku found himself surprised that the halls and classrooms were relatively empty. Due to this small detail, Izuku was unable to find Class 1A, the class he had hoped to be spending the rest of his academic year learning in. After a small bit of roaming around the halls of UA, Izuku eventually found his classroom, which had a massive door, big enough to dwarf All Might. They really do accommodate all sorts of students. Izuku stared at the giant door for a few moments before opening and entering the classroom, which was also empty. What the? Izuku was dumbfounded to find his classroom empty, quickly pulling out his phone to check the time. Oh. Izuku facepalmed. He had arrived at UA an hour early, and now was left on his own in the building. And so he decided to do the one thing he and his teacher loved to do during the day. Placing his school bag on a table on the far left side of the class, Izuku opened it and pulled out a yellow sleeping bag very similar to his teacher. I've been waiting to use this. Unrolling the bag, Izuku opened it up and placed it on the floor. Shortly after, Izuku climbed in and zipped up the bag, falling asleep not even a moment later. Dude? Izuku woke up to the sound of a voice that sounded familiar, followed by a finger poking his face. Hello? The voice continued and Izuku furrowed his brows. Just a little longer, Sensei Aizawa. Izuku rolled to his side while sighing. Sensei who? The voice and the poking at his face continued for a little while longer, until Izuku finally opened his eyes. All right, I'll get up. Izuku raised his voice slightly, but not in an aggressive manner. Unzipping the sleeping bag, Izuku rolled onto his back and sat up looking in the direction the voice was coming from. Oh, it's you. Izuku stared blankly at the blonde-haired boy with a lightning bolt in his hair. Harsh, dude, the boy said, pretending to sound offended and speaking in a sarcastic tone. He sat on his haunches at eye level with Izuku. Oh, I didn't mean to offend you, Izuku responded, not quite picking up on the sarcasm in his groggy state.
None taken.
The blonde held out his hand with a smile. I was being sarcastic, dude. Izuku looked down at the blonde's hand and shook it. Oh. Well, I'm Izuku Midoriya. It's nice to meet you. Izuku spoke in a tired voice, but the blonde seemed to ignore it. Heh, nice to meet you too, Midoriya. I'm Denki Kaminari. Mind if I sit next to you? Izuku tilted his head a little bit, but nodded while letting go of Kaminari's hand. Awesome! The electric boy stood up and took a seat next to Izuku while he stood up too, rolling up his sleeping bag into a roll and stuffed it into a school bag before sitting down. Oh, right! Yeah, thanks for the help at the entrance exam. You really saved my hide. Kaminari smiled and held out his right hand and a thumbs up to Izuku, who shook his head. It was nothing. I just saved a guy in need like a hero should. Small light formed in Izuku's eyes, and his passion for heroism shone through. The two boys went on to talk with each other awkwardly for the next half an hour, during which the class began to fill up with their classmates. An invisible girl entering first, and the brunette Izuku had saved from the zero-pointer entering last. Upon seeing Izuku, the girl made her way towards him. She had never gotten the chance to thank him for saving her after the entrance exam came to a close during all the confusion. Well, that and Izuku had abruptly said goodbye before walking off to get an autograph from Recover Girl. Hello? The girl arrived at Izuku's desk and began to talk, but got cut off by the voice of Aizawa. This isn't a place to make friends. The whole class, which had been rowdy until just a second ago, went quiet, and everyone except for Izuku looked to the entrance to the classroom in confusion. Where did that voice come from? The brunette was the first to ask, while Izuku simply just pointed at the floor by the door. This is the hero course, so I expect you to all be responsible and take your seats. Shortly after Aizawa's words reached the class, every student who wasn't already seated scurried to their seats, while Aizawa was in a bigger version of the sleeping bag Izuku had used earlier. He unzipped it and stood up, coming into view of the entire class. It took you 7 seconds to settle down after I reprimanded you. Time is precious and irreplaceable. Misusing it like this is unacceptable. Some of the students of Class 1A audibly gulped, while Izuku just sat with his head resting on his palm. I am Shota Aizawa, and I'll be your homeroom teacher for your time in Class 1A. You may call me Sensei Aizawa. His introduction brought some confusion amongst most of the students. Is he even a hero? A pink girl asked, not so discreetly. I think so, Kaminari replied, while looking back and forth in between Izuku and Aizawa, whose actions made them resemble each other. Meanwhile, Izuku was getting ready to fanboy out about Aizawa, but before he could speak, Aizawa reached into his sleeping bag and pulled out a pile of blue, red, and white uniforms and placed it on the podium in front of their class. Put these on and go out to the training field. The class was dumbfounded, including Izuku, who had been told by Aizawa that he would be treated like a regular UA student. The students of Class 1A slowly trickled out of the class and headed towards the training fields of UA. Changing out of their regular uniforms, the students all walked out into the field in their gym uniforms, with Izuku arriving first and some small boy with purple balls on his head arriving last. The class all stood at the base of the training field near a cement circle. Midoriya, you got the highest score in the entrance exam. Aizawa paused mid-sentence, throwing a baseball at Izuku, who caught it without a hitch, while Bakugo scoffed when he heard that Izuku scored the highest in the entrance exam. Stand on the circle and throw it. You're free to use your own quirk. Aizawa spoke promptly, and Izuku nodded, although he was slightly confused when Aizawa mentioned that he could use his quirk. Despite that, Izuku walked onto the cement circle and readied himself to throw the ball, gazing drowsily down at it before extending his arm out behind him and swinging it as hard as he could. A few moments later, a soft ding sounded from Aizawa's pants pocket, and he reached into it, pulling out some device with a number on it. Nice, 45 meters. Aizawa looked up at Izuku, who had a smile on his face. Some of the students had an impressed look on their faces, while the others looked confused. One girl in particular raised her hand. Aizawa-sensei? What does this have to do with our orientation? The girl tilted her head while some of the other students made comments mentioning their confusion as well. I'm glad you asked, Aizawa said with a grin that some would consider creepy. You won't be doing orientation. Instead, you'll be doing a quirk-based assessment that will measure your worth. Izuku's eyes widened after Aizawa's last few words, and he immediately knew what was going to happen next. So are we going to the orientation later? The small boy with a grapevine for a hairline spoke, stuttering all the way through due to the intimidation of Aizawa. No, you will not. Now focus on what I'm saying. Aizawa spoke in an irritated tone, and the whole class quieted down, despite many of them having objections. For this test, as clearly conveyed in the name, you'll all be doing quirk-related tasks, or more specifically, you'll be doing physical activities while using your quirk to perform better. Some of the students began to whisper again. But instead of complaining about the exercise, they were excited. Some of them even began to cheer. This is gonna be fun! An abnormally pink girl with horns cheered, annoying Aizawa in the process. Other students agreed while fist pumping in the air, which visibly annoyed Aizawa even more, which prompted Izuku to facepalm. Fine, if you're not going to take this seriously, then let's add consequences. Whoever comes last will be deemed as unworthy and will be expelled on the spot. Aizawa didn't raise his voice once, but his intimidating glare as well as his tone caused the class to go quiet again. But that's not fair, we just got here, the brunette from earlier said, causing other students to agree. Yeah, how are we supposed to get a chance to prove ourselves if we get expelled on the first day? This caused Izuku to facepalm again, and before the students could say anything further, he decided to speak up. Life isn't fair, guys. If a villain were to show up right here, right now, I doubt anyone here, besides Aizawa-sensei, that explosive psycho over there. Izuku paused, pointing his thumb over his back and behind him to Bakugo, who became annoyed due to the comment. And maybe I could take them on. Izuku then pointed to himself, giving all his classmates other than Kaminari and the brunette an immediate bad impression of himself. If anything, you should be happy that your dreams get cut short before it's too late, because if you get expelled now, you still stand a chance of starting your life and applying for other schools. Although Izuku wasn't sure that he could actually defeat the villains that were shown on TV, like that one sludge villain All Might defeated a few months back, the words of dreams being cut short really hit deep, and his words conveyed that. Aizawa, on the other hand, stood there impressed. Normally he would have intervened, but seeing as how his protege managed to get the whole class to go quiet, made him feel a sense of ease. Regardless, he still wasn't impressed with all the students' remarks, including Izuku's, even if he had good intentions. That's right. Life isn't fair, and after Midoriya's explanation, I'm sure you guys can understand what's going on. Aizawa then commenced the quirk assessment test. The tests were simple: side steps, squats, 100-meter sprints, and so on. Izuku performed average in all of them, besides the students whose quirks specialized in the different activities. Izuku always performed better than most of his classmates, showing the fruits of his training. He was surprised when he saw the purple-haired boy using his quirk to bounce from side to side in the sidestep test, but ultimately felt bad for the boy due to his small and weak stature. That Midoriya sure was confident in his abilities earlier, but he's not once scored first in any of the physical activities other than the push-ups, sit-ups, and squats. A somewhat taller girl with long black hair that looked more dignified than the others spoke. I think I saw a few strands of hair falling to the ground, the pink girl added on, which prompted Kaminari to reply, Hey, don't say that. It's not like he's going to go bald just from exercising. Anyway, Midoriya is very physically capable, and his confidence is well placed. After all, he saved my hide in the entrance exam, Kaminari said, scratching the back of his head. At that moment, they were all standing and watching Izuku run the 100 meters, while Bakugo just blasted through it, not even touching the ground once. Yeah, he saved me from being crushed by the zero-pointer, the brunette chimed in, her cheeks going from pink to a minor red as her thoughts traced back to exactly how Izuku had saved her. This helped with the current bad impression the other students had on Izuku, which also began to stem with his similar characteristics from their teacher. Later, the class stood in the crowd in front of a hologram that listed the results of each student from best to worst. I'm disappointed. The whole class was dumbfounded by Aizawa's words, Izuku included. But, but I tried my hardest! The purple-haired boy, whose name was revealed to be Mineta, bawling his eyes out after he saw the results. How could you say that? The pink-haired girl exclaimed. It's not like anyone could be last or should be last. The girl said, causing all the other students besides Izuku and Bakugo, who remained silent, to agree. Not just in him, but in half of you, Aizawa said in a harsh tone. Izuku, realizing what was going on yet again, he, despite being quirkless, got ninth on the scoreboard, meaning 11 of the students with quirks scored lower than him. What? The girl wanted to continue talking, but was cut short by Aizawa. Midoriya stepped forward. Izuku did as his teacher had told him, and stepped out in front of the students. You said that it wasn't like nobody could get last, and that last spot wasn't meant for anyone, Aizawa asked rhetorically. But the pink-haired girl nodded anyway. Remember how you guys said that this test isn't fair? Well, as Izuku Midoriya, the first quirkless student to ever pass the entrance exam over here, said, life isn't fair. The whole class went silent besides Mineta, who was quietly sobbing. Izuku's face went pale after being called out like that in front of his entire class. He had never discussed with his teacher if his being quirkless would remain a secret to his classmates, but now the answer to that conversation to be was clear. Some of the students wanted to speak in their defense, but couldn't come up with anything. In this world, if a quirkless person who has to put in all the extra effort can outperform you, who has been born with a quirk, an easy way into the system, so to speak, then you do not deserve to be in UA. Aizawa spoke in a cold and brash tone. Turning his gaze to Mineta specifically, he spoke again. Mineta, pack your bags and go to the principal's office. I'm afraid your time here is done. The rest of you, go get changed. You've got the rest of the day ahead of you. The girl who had previously called out Izuku, whose name was Momo, had a face that was whiter than the rest of her classmates, coupled with a baffled expression. Sometime later during the school day, Class 1A was in between subjects and waiting for their teacher to arrive. Momo, who was sitting in the frontmost row of the class, spoke loud enough for the entire class to hear her. I don't suppose you all thought that Aizawa-sensei was bluffing too, right? This caught the attention of everyone in the classroom. Nope, I thought my life depended on my performance the entire way through. Kaminari said, eyeing the seat that was once occupied by Mineta. I didn't think once he was bluffing. He looked so serious, and if anything, I feel like Midoriya might have saved another student from being expelled when he spoke up, Uraraka said, eyeing Izuku for a moment before turning her gaze to Momo again. Speaking of, I know today was a bit gloomy, but can we just take a moment to think of how hard Midoriya must have worked to get here? Mina said in an enthusiastic tone, which picked up the mood. Most of the students turned to ask Midoriya questions, but unfortunately for them, he was sleeping on his arms. Bakugo, in the meantime, who was 2 seats in front of Izuku, scoffed and spoke up.
That quirkless brat should have gone to law school. There's no way he'll become a hero at that pace.
Some of the students found this unnerving, so they decided to respond. How so? He was able to do a lot better than most of us without a quirk, Uraraka protested, with some of the other students chiming in, but Bakugo just scoffed again.
Please! What's a hyper-intelligent athlete like Deku gonna do against the likes of me? Someone with just as much brains and an explosive quirk!
Although he didn't completely show it, Bakugo had respect for Izuku. However, he was not bluffing. Oh, please, he has some moves to go with that physical prowess as well. I saw it firsthand, Kaminari protested. However, despite supporting and having mad respect for Izuku due to their first encounter, even he knew deep down that if Bakugo, that bi-colored teen that had stayed quiet the entire time, or even he, for that matter, used their quirks to their full potential, Izuku wouldn't stand a chance. I wouldn't be so sure, Yaoyorozu spoke up again, directing the class's attention to her. Izuku is yet to be in his prime, and remember, every hero has support items to help them in their endeavor. Some of the students nodded, but Bakugo just shook his head.
So what if he has those? There's only so much a quirkless brat like him can do.
Bakugo reiterated his point, and Yaoyorozu nodded. The whole class knew that he wouldn't be able to keep up, no matter what he did. At least not with the likes of Bakugo. Hold on, why do you keep calling him a quirkless brat? Mina asked, prompting the whole class to look at Bakugo.
Yeah, it's not cool, dude,
Kirishima added. I agree, I'm sure he has enough hardships as it is being quirkless. He doesn't need you calling it out every other sentence involving him. Kaminari's addition to it caused Bakugo to abruptly stand up.
Why are you all defending him? I know you were all thinking that it's his fault that the grape-haired boy got expelled.
Bakugo raised his voice, which caused Izuku to wake up. Kachan, not now. Go bother someone else. Raising his head slightly, Izuku spoke the words before lowering his head again.
Has he been awake this entire time?
A frog-like girl who had remained somewhat silent during the entire conversation said, causing some of the students to go pale.
I hope not,
Kirishima said softly.
I believe that we should drop this conversation immediately.
A boy with blue hair and glasses stood up, moving his arms in a robot-like manner. The teacher will arrive soon, and the last thing we need is a first bad impression. And with that, the conversation came to a close, and the rest of the day progressed like normal. School had come to a close. Izuku didn't know how, but he found himself walking home with Ochako Uraraka, Denki Kaminari, and the blue-haired boy that told the class to drop the topic of conversation that had woken him up. I can't believe you're quirkless, Deku, the brunette said while punching the air above her head. Yeah, dude, that's really cool. He simply nodded, not shifting his tired gaze in front of him. Thanks, guys, was all the boy said, which caused an awkward silence to befall the group. The blue-haired boy who had been eyeing Izuku from the side spoke up after a few seconds of silence. Midoriya, why does Bakugo call you Deku? Izuku turned his gaze and eyed the blue-haired boy, meeting his. Quickly looking away, the blue-haired boy cleared his throat, while Uraraka and Kaminari stayed silent. Oh, Kachan? He calls me Deku because it means useless. I don't really mind it, though. With that, the silence came to a close, and Uraraka and Kaminari began to speak up again. Really? But it sounds like the Japanese word that means, I can do it. I think it sounds really cool. Uraraka spoke with so much enthusiasm, it almost made Izuku blush. Kaminari, on the other hand, also wanted to chime in. He didn't know any of the special meanings for specific words, and was quite frankly looking for something to add in. Oh yeah, like Nugatory! Kaminari chimed in, causing the group to go silent. Ochako looked somewhat confused, but Izuku and the blue-haired boy looked really confused. You mean Nugatory as in another word for useless? The blue-haired boy said, causing Kaminari's face to go pale. Faking a few coughs, Kaminari tried to change the subject at hand. Well, what is your name anyway? Kaminari choked on his words, but he managed to get it out eventually. The change of topic almost didn't work, but the blue-haired boy promptly facepalmed. Where are my manners? I am Tenya Ida. It's a pleasure to meet you. Nice to meet you, Ida. Izuku's words were short and abrupt, but they conveyed his emotions to a certain extent. Yeah, nice to meet you, Ida, Uraraka chimed in. Shortly after, the group continued walking with small talk. Uraraka, who hadn't quite finished talking yet, forgot what she wanted to say next. The next day, Class 1A was patiently waiting in their classroom, waiting for the heroics teacher to arrive. They hadn't had the subject the previous day, so the whole class was curious to see who their teacher would be. Naturally, this led to some small talk among the students. I wonder if All Might will be our teacher. Jiro, a girl with earphone jacks for earlobes, said with curiosity in her voice. Mina looked at her confused. That would be really cool and all, but he isn't a teacher at UA. Asui chimed in along with comments from a few other students.
Didn't you hear? There are rumors that All Might will be teaching at UA this year, Ribbit.
The toad-like girl put an index finger on her chin and tilted her head slightly to the side. Mina raised an eyebrow and was about to talk when suddenly, the door to the classroom got knocked out of its hinges and was flown across the classroom with a massive tall man with blonde hair entering the room behind it.
I am here, coming through the door like a normal person.
All Might, the #1 hero, exclaimed with a smile on his face. Most of the students were frightened from the sudden noise, but cheered out with joy nevertheless. But you came in after knocking the door across the room, Momo said softly under her breath after settling down due to the surprise of All Might. All Might, in the meantime, took his place at the podium in the front of the classroom while the students continued to cheer.
Yes. Thank you. Now settle down, students, settle down.
All Might stood tall and proud, gazing down at his students who began to settle down, as he had instructed. Midoriya in particular caught his eye. The boy looked confused and was sitting in his seat, rubbing his eyes. He had of course been taking a nap.
All right, students, we don't have much time to waste. I am your foundational heroics teacher, and today we will be doing a trial of battle.
All Might spoke in his usual, upheld and joy-inducing tone. Reaching down to the podium, All Might pressed the button, and the wall to the left of the students slid down, revealing a series of boxes with numbers related to their seating.
These are your hero costumes. Get changed into them and head to Practice City B.
The students all nodded. Each one was excited to wear their costumes for the first time. 10 minutes later in the boys' changing rooms, each student was just about to finish getting ready. Some of the costume choices intrigued the various boys.
Wow, Bakugo, your costume is hella complex,
Kirishima said, causing Bakugo to just scoff and look away. Realizing that he wasn't going to get a response, Kirishima directed his attention to Izuku, who was just about done getting ready. His costume looked awfully close to Aizawa's. He was clad in black clothing with white capture gear around his neck. Quite frankly, the only difference in between the boy's costume and his mentor's was the glaring fact that he didn't need goggles, since he didn't have an eye-related quirk.
Wow, Midoriya. You seem to have a very similar costume to Aizawa-sensei.
The red-headed boy struggled to speak. He had his doubts that Izuku and Aizawa had some connection, but Izuku's costume really didn't do anything to indicate otherwise. Oh yeah, of course! I've looked up to Aizawa-sensei since I was a kid. The fact that he could become such a successful hero, despite only having an eye-related quirk, really resonated with me. Izuku's tired expression basically disappeared, a smile taking its place. To be honest, I had no idea who Aizawa-sensei was until he introduced himself, Kaminari said, scratching the back of his head awkwardly. Many of the other students nodded and voiced their agreements, but Izuku didn't falter. That's because he's an underground hero. He saves the lives of people in the shadows while staying out of the public eye. Izuku was just about ready to go on a tangent on the feats of his mentor, but Ida clearing his throat caused him to quiet down.
I apologize for the interruption, Midoriya, but we must finish up and get to the training field, or else All Might will gain a bad impression of us all.
The blue-haired boy stood clad in armor resembling that of a knight in shining armor, ready to charge in the battle to save his maiden. His words resonated with his classmates that had flashbacks to the events of the previous day. Moments later, the whole class of 1A was inside the test city that was Field B. They all stood in front of All Might in a crescent moon shape.
All right, students, it's time I explained your first battle trial. Today's trial will be a heroes versus villains battle. The heroes will be invading, and the villains will be defending. All the teams will be picked at random from these 2 boxes in front of me.
All Might gestured to the 2 boxes in front of him.
You villains will have 10 minutes to place the bomb on any floor of the building. Now, with everything explained, we shall pick the teams.
All Might promptly reached into the boxes and pulled out 2 pieces of paper from each.
Team A will be Izuku Midoriya and Denki Kaminari versus Team B, which will be Ojiro Masharo and Tenya Ida.
After announcing the rest of the students' teams, all the students bar Izuku and Ida's teams all entered a room with a huge screen, displaying hidden cameras in the building. Team A stood outside of the 5-story building that they would be breaching, while Team B prepared themselves. So, what's our game plan, Midoriya? Kaminari asked while Izuku quietly thought out a strategy, recalling the memories of how their opponents had used their quirks in the examination just a day prior. From observing them yesterday, I'm guessing they'll more than likely split up. One of them, probably the one that's likely to just be able to slow us down, will likely try to either meet us on the first floor or from a vantage point. Izuku furrowed his eyebrows briefly while Kaminari listened closely. Ida's the only one out of the two of them that I feel we both might have trouble fighting on our own. Since you have a lightning quirk, you could get him from a distance or whenever you get close. Izuku began to mumble in his signature way, which slowly began to creep Kaminari out as he slowly formulated a plan. Midoriya? I can't make out what you're saying. Kaminari's words brought Midoriya out of his mumbling fit and brought him back to his senses. I have an idea, Midoriya said softly before turning to face Kaminari. Not so far away on the 5th floor of the building, Ida and Ojiro had just finished formulating their own plan. Ida was to stay in the bomb room, and Ojiro, who was told to retreat if he thought something was amiss, was on his way to the bottommost floor of the building. Ida spoke through the earpiece that their team had.
Good luck, my nefarious comrade! Remember, those pesky heroes might come up with a sneaky plan!
Ojiro, who wasn't taking this nearly as serious as Ida, struggled to reply. Yeah. Ojiro spoke in an unsure and almost speechless voice. He and Ida had decided that it was better to take out the weaker link of the hero team, which they assumed to be Midoriya first. Further down the building, hiding in the blind spot next to the stairwell, was Midoriya with Kaminari nowhere in sight. The boy had his ear against the wall, and despite how faint they were, Midoriya could hear light footsteps above him. Moments later, the footsteps got louder and louder, with Izuku gripping onto his capture gear. Just need to catch him off guard, Izuku, he thought to himself, while the footsteps got louder and louder, now echoing into the hallway. Moments later, Ojiro walked out into the hallway, and as Izuku had predicted, he was in Ojiro's blind spot. As fast as he could, Izuku leaped out from behind the wall, with his knee aimed at Ojiro's upper back, with his capture gear ready to restrain him. Got you! Izuku called out, as he was about to make contact with Ojiro. However, instead of making contact, Izuku felt a sudden pain in his side before suddenly being knocked across the hallway and into a wall. I might not have a flashy quirk, but what I do have is a giant tail, Ojiro said in a monotone voice, while getting into a fighting position, with his tail swaying behind him. Izuku, who had coughed out some of his saliva, stood up wiping his chin with his sleeve. Fair, Izuku said, going completely quiet after the word left his mouth. Getting into a fighting pose of his own with one of his hands gripping tightly on the capture gear, Izuku's gaze met Ojiro's. And frankly, Izuku's gaze sent shivers down Ojiro's spine. A brief memory of their homeroom teacher flashing in his mind. Ojiro felt uneasy, forcing himself to break eye contact with Izuku, whose sudden silence and gaze reminded him a lot of their homeroom teacher. It was a gaze that voiced what Izuku was thinking, so much so that he could practically hear the words as if they were coming from their teacher. You think you've got an advantage, but you're going to lose. That's what Izuku's eyes told him, and frankly, it put Ojiro on the back foot. Izuku was practically oozing confidence, and the fact that shortly after Ojiro broke eye contact, Izuku made eye contact again, told the tailed boy that Izuku, who had despite having been knocked away, was in control. This caused a growing lack of confidence from Ojiro, which caused him not to move, promptly starting a standstill in between both he and Izuku. In the control room, the whole class focused on Izuku and Ojiro.
Why are they standing still?
Kirishima asked, voicing most of the students' thoughts. It looks like they're having a stare-off, Momo responded. She was reading the situation closely, but still couldn't think of a proper answer. Other than Ojiro's visible nervousness, she couldn't make out what was going on.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see,
All Might said, his tone notifying the students that even he was truly unaware of what was going to happen next. A second later, Izuku took a step forward, and Ojiro took a step back. This caused Izuku to furrow his eyebrows a bit, but shortly after his face returned to its intimidating glare. Taking another step forward, Izuku prompted Ojiro to take another step back, and another, until Ojiro was just about to be out of the way of the stairwell. What's wrong? Izuku's words were held high with confidence, but his tone intimidated Ojiro more. These words left Ojiro speechless, and his silence caused Izuku to smirk. and suddenly his gaze changed to that of his normal, tired expression. Letting go of his capture gear, Izuku practically dropped his guard completely with a smile that was, in that moment, the only thing that didn't resemble Aizawa. Got you! Got ya! Ojiro's eyes widened, a bright yellow light taking up most of his peripheral view. Crap. Kaminari touched Ojiro, and suddenly his body erupted in a stream of electricity coating him. Shortly after, the electricity faded, and Ojiro fell to the ground unconscious.
Ojiro has been captured!
All Might's voice sounded through the speakers, informing Ida of Ojiro's defeat.
We did it!
Kaminari said, pumping his fist into the air. Izuku just smiled while restraining Ojiro with the handcuffs. That we did. Now we should go find Ida together. Kaminari nodded, and the duo walked up the stairs, beginning to search the building for Ida and the bomb. So that's where Kaminari was. I never saw that coming. Izuku and Kaminari, despite having done something that seemed so incredibly simple, managed to surprise and impress their classmates.
That damn Deku didn't even do anything,
Bakugo grumbled under his breath. Other than glaring at their opponent, Izuku hadn't actually done much. It looked as if he hadn't even originally intended to fight Ojiro in the first place. Smart. Midoriya probably didn't want to waste too much time on Ojiro. Momo observed the screens closely as Izuku and Kaminari got closer and closer to Ida, who was frantically moving about in the bomb room, getting ready for Izuku and Kaminari to inevitably arrive.
Not gonna lie, I'm partially glad I didn't get matched up against them. But part of me also wishes I did get matched up against them because of Midoriya,
Kaminari added on. Despite being with All Might in the room, the boy couldn't help but be honest. He was up for a good challenge, but Midoriya and Kaminari just looked like easy pickings.
Perhaps you are right, young... yes, young Kirishima. Anyways, perhaps you are right about wanting to fight Midoriya. There is no harm or foul in wanting to have it easy. But remember, students...
All Might paused as Izuku and Kaminari entered the room, which was filled with wooden cargo boxes stacked up in various cubes, with Ida standing in the middle of the room.
Someone who knows what it's like to feel powerless will improvise.
All Might paused again as Ida began a speech of sorts.
Ha 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 ha! Heroes! I see you have found the bomb room. As you can see, I have stacked these cargo boxes up in cubes. One of these cubes has the bomb in it, and you pesky heroes will have to get through me to start searching for it.
Ida's engine started up, and he began to dash toward Izuku and Kaminari, who split up while All Might continued.
No matter what, they will grasp onto the power they have gained. They will grip onto it tightly.
All Might paused again as Ida targeted Midoriya and jumped into the air, swinging his leg in an arch through the air, aiming for the back of Izuku's head with his engines boosting him.
I've got you now, hero!
Ida exclaimed as his leg was about to collide with Izuku's head.
And they will embrace it. And once they have embraced it, they will rise and display the fruits of their labor.
All Might paused once again as time seemed to slow down for everyone in the room. Despite how vague it was, the whole class saw something on Izuku's face. They couldn't make out what it was, but his green orbs were following Ida almost perfectly.
Are you sure about that?
The words reached Ida and the rest of Class 1A, just as Izuku lowered his head in time to dodge Ida's attack. Wrapping his capture gear around the leg Ida had just used to kick him with, Izuku tugged on the capture gear, planting his feet on the ground, while Ida's leg landed nearby.
Now!
Izuku yelled out, and Kaminari quickly lunged toward Ida and released a wave of electricity. However, Ida had seen this coming in the first place.
Nice try, heroes, but that won't work on me.
Ida did a 360 spin with his engine still active, pulling Midoriya towards him and in the way of the electricity, effectively using him as a human shield.
Ah!
Izuku gasped as a wave of electricity shot through him and his body spazzed.
Crap!
Kaminari yelled out quickly, letting the electricity dissipate. Ida, in this moment, used Kaminari's distraction to his advantage. Using his free leg, Ida kicked Kaminari's jaw in an upwards kick, knocking him off his feet and unconscious simultaneously.
You might have somehow managed to defeat my compatriot, but you never stood a chance against me.
Ida began to maniacally laugh, taking his role a tad bit too seriously.
What? He took them down in seconds.
His reaction speed is so fast. Kirishima and Uraraka both gasped due to the sudden revelation. Ida had practically defeated them in seconds.
He took them down in seconds,
Asui added in. Bakugo, in the meantime, just scoffed, turning his head to face away from the screen with furrowed eyebrows and what looked to be a forced smirk.
Huh. That shitty Deku always has to one-up his opponents,
Bakugo mumbled. Some of the students, including Momo, who were closer to him, heard his words.
What do you mean?
Kirishima asked. And before anyone else could ask the same question, Momo responded by her eyes widening after having just realized something thanks to Bakugo. Watch closely. Momo's abrupt words caught the class off guard, and they all went silent. Each and every one of them took a closer look at the screen.
Midoriya's.
Asui's words fell short as the whole class realized what had happened. That hurt a bit more than I expected. Izuku forced the words out as he slowly rose to his feet, catching Ida off guard.
You still choose to fight, hero?
Ida exclaimed. A short silence befell the room when he saw Izuku's face. Ordinarily, that electric shock would have knocked out a human, Izuku said softly. His bottom lip was bleeding and the dark circles under his eyes had disappeared. But I'm awake now, and all I have to say to you is checkmate. Izuku smiled and tugged on his capture gear. This bit, Ida exclaimed as his legs were pulled out from under him, the hard metal of his hero costume clanking against the concrete floor below. I wasn't expecting you to react so fast and knock out Kaminari, but I was expecting you to get carried away with all that monologuing. Izuku confused Ida. They barely knew each other, so how could he possibly have known what Ida would have done? Minutes earlier.
What are we gonna do, Mito?
Kaminari whispered softly, just outside of the entrance to the boom room that Ida had just finished prepping. Mito? Izuku responded in confusion before shaking his head and answering. Shh, give me a second. Izuku held a hand up, moving his head forward so that he could hear Ida, who was talking to himself. All right, Ida, you must prepare yourself. You need to take this seriously. Ida began to do a series of throat exercises to prepare his vocal cords.
Heroes! I see you have arrived.
No, that won't do. I need to do something with more edge. Ida pinched his chin in between his index finger and thumb for a brief moment. I know!
Ha ha ha! Heroes! I see you have found the bomb room. As you can see, I have stacked these cargo boxes up in cubes. One of these cubes has the bomb in it, and you pesky heroes will have to get through me to start searching for it.
Ida's words fell short at the end, and Kaminari, who was also listening, struggled to hold back a laugh that was beginning to form at the back of his mouth. Yes. And if I managed to defeat them, I should also be able to go on a tangent about how I was able to defeat them. Ida went on to plan out some of his potential tangents, and even Izuku, in his tired state, couldn't help but smile. Regardless, Midoriya turned to face his teammate. All right, here's the plan. Back in the present, Izuku stood over Ida, using his capture gear to tie his legs together, and shortly after using the handcuffs to restrain his hands. Thank goodness you took the role so seriously. If it weren't for that, this fight would have started and ended a lot differently, Midoriya said softly, patting Ida on the shoulder before taking on a serious expression. Now I just need to find the bomb. Izuku quickly searched the room, removing a box from each cube and looking inside of them for the bomb. Roughly 3 minutes later, Izuku found it.
The hero team wins, and with less than a minute to spare.
All Might spoke through the speakers to the students, and Izuku quickly released Ida before checking on Kaminari, who was slowly waking up. You all right, Kaminari? Izuku's voice had returned to its tired state, and the dark circles under his eyes had partially returned. Yeah, did we win? Kaminari's eyes lit up, and Izuku simply nodded. He walked over to Ida and untied him, removing all the restraints before helping him up, and holding a hand out to shake the blue boy's hand. We've both got lots of room to improve. I need to work on putting myself more on the front line and using my body while minimizing damage. And you, frankly, well, I didn't fight you long enough to call it anything, but let's get better together and fight each other again. Ida took off his helmet and smiled. He reached out his hand and shook Izuku's. You did well, Midoriya. but I'd like to know how you knew I would monologue. Oh, I have reasons. Izuku smiled, letting go of Ida's hand after a few seconds, opting not to inform the blue-haired boy of one of his cards. Certainly you could tell them to me, right? Ida asked, but Izuku just shook his head and exited the room, and soon after, he exited the building, leaving Ojiro to Ida and Kaminari to set free on their way out. I need some sleep, Izuku said to himself softly when he entered the examination room where the rest of his classmates greeted him.
Whoa, I can't believe you managed to turn that around, Midoriya. That was super manly.
Yeah, Deku, that was amazing. All the students chimed in, and by the end of it, Izuku was left blushing, and with a bit of a confidence boost.
All right, students, that's enough for the comments. Can any of you tell me who the MVP was?
All Might spoke, and at once the students had finally quieted down. A small silence entered the room for a moment until Momo raised her hand.
Yes, young lady?
All Might responded, prompting Momo to speak. I believe the MVP should be Izuku Midoriya. Some of the students nodded, and others who were in support of Ida shook their heads in disapproval.
And why is that?
All Might asked, prompting the girl to back up her words. Some might think that he should be the MVP because he was on the winning team. However, I believe that Midoriya should be the MVP because he formulated plans and stuck to them, allowing for Team A to execute them properly. All Might nodded, but that wasn't everything there was to it.
And is there anything else you'd like to call out?
Midoriya might have been the leading factor, but I also believe that Ida should be the MVP. He took the test seriously. He gave it his all and stuck to his role, preparing the room and hiding the bomb to his best ability, while also setting up in a way that would allow him to fight, even if there wasn't that much conflict between Midoriya's planning.
So then, who should be the MVP? After all, young lady, there can only be one.
Momo's words had the whole class thinking. In conclusion, I believe it should be Izuku Midoriya. Although he only restrained his opponents and put his teammate at a huge risk, he calculated the situation and acknowledged his limits. Using that to his advantage, Izuku Midoriya led Team A to victory. All Might nodded. There was nothing left for him to add. He had some advice to give young Midoriya, but for now he had to focus on the assessment. After that, the next few fights went on smoothly. The boy with red and white hair froze over the building and won within the first few minutes. Bakugo simply overpowered his opponents and won with relative ease, with the rest of the battles having no eventful moments.
Aizawa walked into Class 1A, surprised to see that his students were seated and quiet. Good. It seems you guys do know how to act responsibly, Aizawa commented as he walked to the center of the room. Now, today is a bit of a surprise as we're going off campus on a field trip.
Wait, really? Oh, right! I wonder where we'll go.
What do you think, Midoriya? The class began yet another unhinged group of ramblings, but were quickly silenced by the activation of Eraserhead's quirk. You all have 15 minutes to get dressed into your hero costumes, and meet me by the entrance of the UA building. Aizawa spoke in his usual tired voice, not giving the class a chance to protest before turning and leaving. 15 minutes later, the whole class was lined up in an orderly fashion, with Ida, who had been elected the class representative just a day prior, sorting them out and getting them to enter the bus quietly. Shortly after this, the bus was well on its way towards their destination, each student sitting quietly in their seats as an awkward air engulfed the bus. So, any ideas on where we're going? Kaminari asked in a desperate attempt to wave away the awkward silence.
Maybe we're going to some hero agency.
If that were the case, then we would have been asked to give our parents a note asking for their permission. Then maybe we're going to another school for a joint class. No, that wouldn't make sense. Maybe we're going to some kind of training camp? Slowly, a conversation picked up as most of the students began to chime in on the possibilities of where they would be headed.
Midoriya, what's your relationship with Sensei Aizawa?
Sue's sudden question caused the class to go silent, and Midoriya to go blank. Sorry? Please repeat that?
What's your relationship with Sensei Aizawa?
Sue repeated. Actually, I'm kind of interested too, Mito. Well, Midoriya hesitated, looking to the front of the bus at Aizawa, who was sleeping upright in his chair.
Yeah, Midoriya, you guys seem so similar.
It's nothing, really. Sweat began to trickle down Midoriya's forehead. His classmates' growing intrigue put a weight on his chest. I'm kind of curious as well, Uraraka added. Fine. Ever since I was young, I've idolized Sensei Aizawa as the best hero in the world. I found it amazing how he was able to beat villains left, right, and center, all while remaining ambiguous and without using a flashy quirk. Midoriya glanced at Bakugo, who had argued a lot with him about who was the better hero in between Aizawa and All Might. Then, when I was 12, I decided to take a shortcut to a grocery store, and I just so happened to walk past a serial killer on the loose. Aizawa-sensei saved me, and the rest is history. Midoriya smiled, electing not to tell his classmates about his tutelage under Aizawa. So that's why you dress like him, Izuku? Wow, you're a hardcore fanboy! Kaminari raised his voice. I suppose you can say that. Izuku replied awkwardly as the rest of the class began to mingle among themselves, now that the conversation was over. Alright, class, we've arrived. Class 1A stood outside of a massive dome. Aizawa and the pro hero known as 13 stood in front of the doors. Where's All Might? He said he'd be here 10 minutes late. He overused his quirk again. Then we'll have to start without him. The two turned to face the class. All right, students, let's get started. Follow me. 13 turned around and opened the doors to the facility. She then walked in, with the class following her as she had instructed. Now, as some of you might know, I am the pro hero 13, and today, I will be instructing you all. The hero talked as she walked, the students staring in awe at the view granted to them as soon as they entered the building. This is the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, the USJ for short. It's filled with every natural disaster known to mankind, and you students will be assigned various tasks in each simulation. 13 stopped walking and turned around to face the students of Class 1A. Does anyone have any questions? The hero looked through the students one by one, noticing that Izuku had an almost exact copy of Aizawa's costume. Yes, ma'am. Momo raised her hand. The hero gestured for her to talk. Is this a heroics class? If so, where is All Might? Instead of letting 13 reply, Aizawa immediately replied for her. All Might ran into some personal problems. He'll arrive shortly. The students all nodded, and Momo thanked Aizawa. Shortly after, Kirishima moved forward a few paces.
Whoa, that's cool! You guys even got fake villains?
Aizawa and 13 looked at each other in confusion before turning around to see what Kirishima was talking about. Those aren't fake villains! Move away, students! In the distance, a purple cloud was swirling in the center of the concrete platform, with villains of all shapes and sizes walking out of it. Get to the exit! The students all went pale as Aizawa took a step forward. 13 waved her arms for the students to get moving, which immediately worked, all of them except for Izuku, who stayed still, eyeing the group of villains. In particular, there was a man with blue hair and white hands all over his body, with a giant black creature behind him. Midoriya, I thought I told you to get to the entrance. Aizawa turned to face Izuku, who had a determined look on his face. No, I want to stay and help. Aizawa shook his head. I refuse. Now go join your classmates. But I wasn't asking, Midoriya. Aizawa's eyes met with Izuku, and immediately chills went up and down Izuku's spine. His heartbeat tensed, and suddenly Aizawa felt 10 times bigger. Yes, Sensei Aizawa. Izuku hesitantly turned around and began to run after his classmates, who had just about reached the entrance.
Kuragiri,
the blue-haired villain started. I understand. The purple mist suddenly vanished and reappeared in front of the students, blocking them from the entrance.
Get out of our way!
Bakugo yelled as he charged the mist, releasing an explosion from each palm to launch himself into the air before releasing another one aimed at the center of the mist.
Yeah!
Kirishima followed closely behind, hardening his fists and charging at the villain closely behind Bakugo. Wait! 13 yelled as Bakugo and Kirishima got close to the mist villain. Suddenly, the mist spread and engulfed the entirety of Class 1A, leaving them all in darkness.
What the? Where are we?
Bakugo and Kirishima looked around them, looking at their surroundings that had changed from a flat concrete plain to a collapsing city filled with flames. Most of Class 1A had been spread throughout the USJ, save for Ida, Midori, and Ojiro, who all remained at the entrance. Where did everyone go? Ida yelled as the mist dissipated, moving to fight 13, who began to use her quirk to suck it up. Damn it, Aizawa thought as he charged down the stairs towards the villains, meeting them halfway as he immediately began to fight them, making the use of his capture gear and his martial arts to knock them out one by one. Back at the entrance of the USJ, Ida, Midori, and Ojiro stared helplessly as the Mist villain used 13's quirk against her, severely injuring her in the process.
Well, what do we do?
Ida exclaimed. He had no idea what had just happened. Too much was going on at once. I think we should call for help. Midoriya's eyes darted left to right. He had no idea what to do. His heart's pace began to pick up as he stared down at the Mist villain. Ida, Sensei Aizawa said that All Might should arrive shortly after us. If you can get out of here and meet him halfway, then he can get here quicker. Taking a step forward, Izuku stepped in between Ida and the Mist villain.
But I can't just leave!
Ida protested. More villains were coming out of the mist, and were now approaching Ida, Ojiro, and Izuku.
Just leave! One less classmate here won't make a difference. We need All Might and fast!
Izuku looked back and over his shoulder at Ida, his jade orbs glaring into Ida's blue ones.
Just go!
Izuku planted his feet on the ground as he gripped onto his capture gear. Ojiro took his place next to Izuku, and both boys stared at the oncoming villains.
What are you talking about? He's not going anywhere.
One of the villains said, his lips curling into a creepy smile. 1, 2, 3, 4. Izuku's eyes darted from villain to villain as he counted them. He has my help, Ida. Go, Ojiro added, while looking back at Ida.
Fine, I'll go!
Ida turned around and made a break for the door. The Mist villain had vanished and returned to Shigaraki by this point, so it was no threat to him.
You're not going anywhere, kid.
A villain with a knife attempted to chase after Ida, but was cut off by Izuku, who wrapped his capture gear around him and tripped him.
I doubt that.
Izuku then proceeded to kick the villain in the face, knocking him out.
Ojiro, I say we'd split them up, but I think it's better to take them on one at a time.
Yeah, Ojiro agreed as the villains closed in on them.
Get the kid!
A villain with giant fists yelled as he charged at Izuku and Ojiro, followed by two villains. One of them had a short sword for a hand, and the other had weird holes throughout his body. Izuku gripped onto his capture gear and dashed forward with Ojiro, keeping up the same pace.
I'll take the knife guy first. I think you should deal with the handyman.
Ojiro nodded as Izuku jumped in the air as the man with giant hands attempted to punch him. Reacting quickly, Izuku stomped on the man's hand and used it as a platform to jump even higher, pushing the man's hand down just enough for Ojiro to hit him with his tail.
Fuzz!
Izuku swung his capture gear in an attempt to wrap it around the knife villain's hand, but suddenly got sent flying by the villain with holes. Meanwhile, the big-handed villain fought Ojiro, attempting to punch and catch the tailed boy, who countered and attacked in response. Ida had made it out the door safely, which annoyed the villains.
You two are so dead!
The handy villain yelled, swinging his fist at Ojiro with pure rage. Ojiro swung his tail, knocking the villain's hand away, following it up with a kick which the villain caught with his free hand. Ojiro took this as an opportunity and swung his free leg, hitting the villain in the stomach. Izuku, on the other hand, charged at the two villains that were now targeting him. His eyes dwelled on the villain with holes for a moment, before he abruptly stopped running forward and started running in an arc around the two villains.
No matter what you try, kid, I'll cut you up!
The villain yelled, charging at Izuku while the whole villain stood still, his eyes following Izuku's movements.
That's so!
Izuku stopped running, his feet sliding on the ground as he gripped onto his capture gear and swung it, attempting to wrap it around the knife villain again.
Hurrahs!
A sudden gust of wind pushed the capture gear away from the knife villain, forcing Izuku to step aside, just barely avoiding a stab wound in the process. Damn! Izuku thought as he pulled the loose capture gear back to himself. He changed his target to the whole villain, the one who had been yelling every time a gust of wind hit him so far.
Changing targets now, are we, eh?
The knife villain yelled from behind Izuku as he rushed forward towards the whole villain.
Fuzz!
Another gust of wind suddenly hit Izuku in the gut, knocking the wind out of him.
Perfect!
The knife villain yelled, charging at Izuku from behind.
Crap!
Izuku's eyes darted to the knife villain as he turned to look behind him.
I've got you now!
The villain yelled as his other hand turned into a knife, while he charged at Izuku, who quickly performed the stop, drop, and roll tactic. Falling to the ground, Izuku rolled on the floor to the best of his ability in his winded state, receiving a cut to his right arm in the process.
What?
The villain looked at Izuku with annoyance as he charged the boy again. Izuku continued rolling as the villain tried and tried to stab him, missing by millimeters every time.
Stay still, you brat!
The villain yelled as Izuku, who was starting to get nauseous, placed his right hand on the ground and used it to boost himself off the floor, as he quickly got up and kicked the villain in the stomach, knocking him away.
Hurrahs!
Another gust of wind shot at Izuku and knocked him off balance for a moment.
You'll pay for that!
The knife villain yelled as he charged at Izuku. Not too far away, Ojiro was still facing the hand villain.
I'll beat you to a pulp!
The villain yelled, taking another swing at Ojiro, who stepped aside and jumped into the air. While in the air, he twirled for a moment, knocking the villain right off his feet with his tail. The boy didn't reply to the threats from the villain, and instead focused on beating the villain, taking the brief moment of the villain being distracted to knock him out. Back with Izuku, he had a few more cuts and was now in between the knife villain and the whole villain again.
You just don't give up!
Why would I? Izuku forced a smile while staring at the villain as he charged at him. The boy remained still as the villain got into close quarters. He was waiting for something.
Fuzz!
Time seemed to slow down for Izuku as the villain from behind him yelled. The knife villain was close to him, but not close enough to stab him. Closing his eyes, Izuku braced himself for impact as he suddenly let his legs give out from under him.
Gah!
The knife villain yelled as he was sent flying. The whole villain's eyes widened as he looked down at Izuku, and then at his teammate that was now on his backside a few meters away.
That was close,
Izuku said softly as he stood back up. His nose was now bloody, but the fall had woken him up. The whole villain began to talk when suddenly a large gust of wind knocked the doors to the USJ open, knocking the villains completely over, rendering them unconscious. Izuku looked in front of him with glee and relief as All Might stood proud and mighty by the staircase, not too far ahead of him.
Do not fear, for I am here!
All Might yelled, alerting everybody in the USJ. The number one hero stared down at the group of villains at the base of the staircase. All of them save for the blue-haired villain and the giant black creature had been defeated by Aizawa, who was now pinned to the ground. All Might dashed forward as everything suddenly became blurry to Izuku. His eyes narrowed as he took a brief step forward, his legs actually giving out from under him.
Midoriya!
Ojiro yelled as he caught Izuku, repeatedly yelling the boy's name until he fell unconscious.
How's he doing?
Izuku faintly heard Aizawa's voice as his consciousness returned to him. He has a concussion, and is a bit drained, but he's completely fine now, Recover Girl responded as Izuku opened his eyes and looked around him. It's a good thing that Ojiro brought him back when he did, or else Izuku would have died from the poison.
Poison?
Izuku whispered softly, alerting Recover Girl and Aizawa to his awakening. Yeah, kid, that knife guy had a poison lace on his knife. You're lucky it only kicked in after All Might arrived. Aizawa wasn't showing it, but he was relieved to see his student awake and well. He was one bed over from Izuku, covered in bandages for the most part. How is everyone? They're fine, Aizawa said softly, causing Izuku to smile. I'm glad. Izuku closed his eyes and let his smile run free for a short while. Thank you all for sticking around, and I hope you enjoyed that last episode of What If Deku was trained by Aizawa. Before you leave, we'd just like to let you know that We the Celestials has many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right below here in the description, so feel free to check out all the other incredible projects our team creates. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today's video, so goodbye and have a divine day.